Today's session would be for comparative public administration and development public administration. Though we have dedicated 2 sessions on it, let us see. If it exceeds, it is all right. We could be able to complete it in one go also. Depends upon the discussion and requirement. Right, sir? So, आपको दिया गया है, इनको पेपर दिए, ये जो दिया जाता है क्वेश्चन पेपर, क्यों नहीं दिए? उसको जाके मंगवाइए, सोनू जी मंगवाइए उसको, तब तक हम बोर्ड पर लिख के बात करते हैं. मतलब what we shall discuss, that has been decided, that has been so the areas of discussion that is listed. So कोई नहीं, let us take up so just to give you a gist, right? As क्या नाम है आपका? Dhruv. As Dhruv had demanded, had rather requested for it yesterday. Okay, sir, if we will have some broader outlook of the subject matter, it would become easier. So to connect the things, the condition is initially there was traditional public administration, it was public administration. And to differentiate from other developments in public administration, it has been named as traditional public administration, right? So it was public administration when Wilson had proposed that there should be one separate discipline that shall take care of the effective implementation. And that was a matter of late 19th century, early 20th century. But in course of time, we find number of things important happened, and there was First World War. And that First World War was there between 1914 to 18. At the end of Second World War, we find one important output, that is USSR established. Organization of USSR after Bolshevik Revolution. So this was the first jolt to the inefficiency of traditional public administration. And thereafter, we find that after 10 years, merely 10 years, there was economic depression. It was 2930. This was another big failure, and that heralded whole world, specifically America, and wherein the public administration activities were being taken care of. So this was another jolt, and scholars thought, what is happening this one? Even after having such a good and effective, well conceptualized mechanism of work, public administration, it is happening. That means that something is missing in public administration. And at this point, we find scholars started thinking of how to resolve the issues. And in course of that thought process, scholars thought to study public administration, its subject matters, in a comparative manner, because that is the only way, I suppose. Everybody knows, everybody is well informed about. It is one of the way wherein the public administration could be studied in an effective manner, or anything can be discussed. So scholars initiated comparative study of the subject matter of public administration. At this point of time, some other things also happened. Another condition was that this public administration is based upon the philosophy of idealism. Idealism is a ought to be condition. How should it be? What ought to be? What ought to be is a condition which cannot be attained exactly. Practically, it is difficult, and there is always a gap between theory and practice. That is idealism. And then scholars of this age thought it is better to think in a realistic manner, because herein the inputs were as ideal. So based upon those, whatever the theories were made, they could not be able to be effective. As they could not be able to be effective, failures are there. So if the theories are made on the basis of the realistic input, then the theories made will be better and perhaps universally applicable. So they started comparative study with realistic study. That is study of realism, study of practice. And based upon that, they thought to evolve theory for generalization, for universalization. So, based on this universal theory building and study of realism with scientific base, and this we call as behavioralism. That is a study of realism. So from this point of view, this point of time, we find that comparative study got initiated. People started thinking of it. Scholars started involving themselves into it. And in course of that, we find that there is one scholar, Keith Henderson. He differentiated between comparative government and comparative public administration. Comparative government and comparative. Because at the same point of time, there was prevalence of similar approach in other subjects also, and in political science also. So the study of this comparative government is basically subject matter of political science. And there was a requirement because public administration had not been able to gain its identity, separate identity. So it was under the umbrella of political science. So Henderson thought to and tried to differentiate between administration and politics. And then we find for the reason of comparative government, Keith Henderson named like it is a study of foreign policy, political party. A constitution, pressure groups, etc. But when it is a matter of study of comparative public administration, he specifically identified about the central administrative system. He identified about the public service, decentralized model of functionality, public finance, control over executive, and all these happen to be the area of study of public administration. In this perspective, the scholars started thinking on the basis of this realistic study, and by that way we find that comparative public administration evolved with the basic objective of theory building and realistic study. Theory building and realistic study with the concern of the administrative problem of developing countries. But this concept of developing countries got included after Second World, because this developing country concept was not there. Unfortunately, what we find herein, by the time the comparative public administration could be able to do something or anything, I'm sorry, could be able to do anything specific, there was another big problem, and that was Second World. Almost 10 years later, 39-45. And that was another big jolt. And then it was identified that some problem is there. And thereafter, we find that number of new things evolved on the world scenario. And one among them was newly independent countries, that is also known as third world countries, and Truman has named it rest, West and rest. Rest means rest of world, excluding the Western countries. With the advent of this, now for the reason of universalization as an objective of comparative public administration, lot of efforts was required, because now the development was also need of the newly independent countries. And then there was a need to have it, for which the American public administration or pre-Second World War public administration was not informed, because all these newly independent countries were basically those African, Asian and Latin American countries which were under colonial state, and the colonial masters had no objective of development except the coercive means, or say objectives of police state. It was not laissez-faire which was there prevailing in America before First World War. That was the condition. In this condition, there was requirement to find out what are the conditions of developing countries. So we find by 50s, and onward, दे दीजिए, एक हमको भी दे दीजिए, है ना? By 50s and onward, there is inclusion of developing countries in the study of comparative public administration. And you can, I'm just leaving a thread for development public administration. You can identify that the concern for third world countries started since this. Right, sir? So that way, the concern by 50s was there, and the comparative study started. And in course of the comparative study, certain mechanisms have been identified with the help of which the comparative study could be conducted. So there are 5 different mechanisms. है ना? Inter-institutional, intranational, cross-national, cross-cultural, and cross-temporal. These are different mechanisms, methodologies, with the help of which that comparative study could be conducted. These had been assigned, these had been evolved as a methodology, wherein we find that cross-cultural and cross-national studies have been conducted a lot. So these were 2 important, others were also involved because international, intranational, so all those were there. So those also have been adopted, but these 2 were the basic methodology of having research and studies in the developing countries. So that way things are there, right? And therein we find in Second World War, post-Second World War perspective, only the comparative public administration became comparative practical. Before this, it was not comparative, it was comparative government type of things. So administration of one country, another country being compared. Based upon that, the difference of Wilson's objective would be difficult to attain. That is the background, right? So one of the important thing is the comparative public administration evolved on the basis of the failure of, in the response of failure of traditional public administration, and the mechanism evolved for the reason of this vital accidents. There was comparative public administration evolved. That was a requirement, failed, right? In this perspective, let us take up, and for today's class, I have specifically, deliberately picked up some way of question which will include almost all the areas, larger areas of study. Like, first of all, it says discuss the evolution of comparative public administration. It's an inclusive topic. It's an inclusive topic. So that is evolution of comparative public administration. With some details, we'll also discuss about the questions on these. When it comes a matter of evolution, so it also includes the origin. How did it evolve? So when it is a matter of origin, historically we find that it was an Indian scholar. Could you name? U.L. Goswami. U.L. Goswami was there in 1955, who had written an article in Indian Journal named Development Administration. It was in 55. And he had written this article in the wake of the development, because it was a matter of the, it was a condition of India in the process of development in its initial phase of independence. But this credit is given to Donald Stone. This Donald Stone was मैं यहां से निकल गया. अच्छा. Sorry, I took development administration. So to revise for the online students, because herein the students who are there in front of me are listening me and reciprocating me directly. So there was just slip of bent of mind, and I entered into development administration. So as per the references over here, मैं इसी के आगे निकल, मुझे वापस यहाँ आना चाहिए जी. So as per the references over here, we find that in the pre-Second World War phase, the initiatives were there like this, but those initiatives were not much effective, and for the different accidents occurring at almost a small span of time, recurring conditions, scholars were under a condition that they could not be able to evolve anything effective. In this regard, Nicholas Henry, regarding the evolution of comparative public administration, Nicholas Henry has observed CPA to be different from traditional public administration, or that is also known as American public administration. And that Nicholas Henry told that public administration is a cultural bound study. CPA is, what do you mean by cultural bound? What does it mean? Basically, when cross-cultural comparison is there, the example could be comparison of India with China, because India is having democracy and China is having communism. So there is change in the political culture of India and China. So India and America would not be cross-cultural. But that is not cross-cultural. Both of them are having democracy. So comparison of China and USSR or Soviet Rus would not be cross-cultural. Right, sir? So CPA is cross-cultural in its cross-cultural in its orientation. That is one of the important things. And another important thing is that It is an attempt to theory building. An attempt to theory building. And that is for the sake of knowledge. Whereas the TPA was practice oriented. For the sake of knowledge. And so it is believed that comparative public administration is purely a scholar's trust, and that could be a question. CPA has purely a scholar's . Now, with the meaning of comparative public administration, wherein we could find the advocacy given by Wilson also, who had advocated about the comparative study approach for the study of public administration, and anticipated that comparative study of public administration would yield one rule of good administration, that is theory building. Chaliye. Let us name some of the factors those contributed in the emergence of CPA. Factors for emergence. As I referred you herein also, there was a revisionist movement being pursued in all humanities, human sciences, and political science, psychology, sociology, all of them were affected for the reason of the discontentment from the previous mode of functionality. So there was revisionist movement due to dissatisfaction from the previous approach. And for that reason, there was intellectual development in comparative humanities, other subjects also. And that also influenced the study of public administration in a comparative manner. So, intellectual development. Another one important, that is, there were newly independent countries. Newly independent countries from Asia, Africa, Latin America and all after Second World War. In course of this, we find that after Second World War, technical and financial assistance programs were led by America to help and influence the newly independent countries for many reasons. One of the concern was development of those countries, but another inner concern, international condition, favor of America for the world hegemony was this, that it was willing to contain the spread of communism. And so to attract the independent countries which were underdeveloped, were requiring a lot of things for their development, assistance programs were launched. So extension of technical and financial assistance programs to the third world countries. Now, look, these are the checkpoints. I'm not going into the details of this, but I'm identifying some important points that could be there on fingertips and will help you to evolve answer, because whatever question we take up, we'll take evolve questions out of this also. But it is difficult to visualize what question would be there in the examination. In the perspective of that only, we try to identify the possible questions, but the basic help is out of whole the big content, what could be there in a crisp manner. And these points will basically, these are the points of synopsis, which are there to cover whole content. Right, sir? In course of this technical programs extended, the American technocrats and administrators used to visit the third world countries, and they found the exposure of the functionality of the third world countries. That also helped to gather the conditions of work, structure, modus operandi of the developing country, and all those helped the comparative public administration to be initiated. So exposure of the visiting American teams. To the third world countries. One of the another important thing was this also, all these third world countries were intensively willing to have development. And for that, there is requirement of policy formulation, for which they had no experience, because all of them were there involved for the struggle for independence. So they had a lot of experience of struggle. They were not having administrative experience of development. They were knowing for the reason of struggle and concern that their countries require development, the area of development. But how could that be attained? That was not there with them. So there was another important thing for the comparative study of public administration. That was policy catalyst. To develop practical knowledge to make policy. In course of this, we find that there was organization of CAG, Comparative Administration Group. And a lot of financial support. To CAG and the study of comparative public administration. And Ford Foundation was one of the important one that led the responsibility of such studies by CAG. And the CAG died only for the reason of the withdrawal of the financial support of Ford Foundation. One of the another important thing was this also, that at that point of time there was a rise of interdisciplinary approach and a behavioral approach. Rise of interdisciplinary and behavioral approach. So these were the important reasons based upon which the public administration evolved. Now, in course of evolution, we find that the pre-war, pre-Second World War CPA was parochial. Now, this is a question. Pre-Second World War CPA was parochial. The traditional approach to CPA happens to be parochial. How is it so? It is parochial. Parochial का मतलब conservative, narrow. And this approach, in its coverage, is centered its attention on the study of formal administrative institution. In the perspective of Keith Henderson, we referred. Formal administrative institutions only. Whereas in today's world, we find that the non-administrative institutions also happen to be very important, which was not involved. And it was studied only in the perspective of some of the developed countries, not for the whole world. So it was USA specifically, then France, Germany, UK, Italy, few of the countries. So it was parochial, and it was not exactly administrative in nature. So we find that this suffers from some limitation, and so it is not comparative exactly in nature. So what are the sufferings? Suffers from limitations. क्या कमी थी भाई? The traditional approach is merely configurative. बात समझ में आ रही है? मैं बहुत छोटे छोटे में बताने की कोशिश कर रहा हूं. Merely configurative, as it stresses the characteristics of administrative system of individual country one by one. So that is not basic. It is reading administration of different countries. Is not comparison practically. It is mostly formalistic with a narrow coverage. Because it did not include the informal institutions. Another important thing that we find when we read post-Second World War, therein ecological approach happens to be very important. And based upon that, we can identify that this is quite parochial or non-ecological. It is non-ecological. So for these reasons, these important reasons, we find it was quite parochial. And in this regard, we could say कि Riggs ने कहा है बड़ा अच्छा कि the traditional approach to CPA happens to be normative, idiographic, and non-ecological. As these are the features of traditional public administration, traditional CPA, pre-Second World War CPA. So this is parochial because these are the conditions. Riggs, I will read this. Riggs has suggested the shift from this to larger size. So it is parochial. And your answer is done. And he concludes, Riggs कहता है कि the term comparative should be used only for such a study which is ecological, which is empirical, and which is nomothetic. So based upon these, the condition is found that the pre-Second World War CPA is parochial. Now, in course of evolution, another important thing, then what is the condition of post Second World War CP? So, question is coverage of post Second World War CPA truly became comparative. Explain, discuss, comment, whatever. So we find that in the post Second World War CPA, lot of coverage has included, has increased for the reason of, first of all, newly independent countries, methodological changes have occurred because the empirical study has been conducted, and with the help of CAG, scholars went to specific countries and tried to study in the perspective. It advocated ecological approach. It became empirical. So all these can be identified by means of the statements of different scholars or institutions. Like CAG defines CP. CAG defines CPA कहता है the theory of public administration applied to diverse cultures and national settings. Applied to diverse cultures and national settings, and the study of factual data by which it can be examined and tested. Although it emphasized based upon diverse culture and all, so it emphasized upon the cross-cultural. Although it emphasized upon the cross-cultural approach, but its focus is not explicitly on public organization. So as its focus is not upon public organizations, so it is not exactly the definition of CAG does not make it quite comparative in a realistic manner, but it reflects about the specific comparison and emphasizing upon the cross-cultural. In this regard, another scholar, one is Jackson, R.H. Jackson. What R.H. Jackson says, CPA is concerned with making rigorous cross-cultural comparisons of structure. CPA is concerned with making rigorous cross-cultural comparisons of structures, processes, and activities. That makes it comparative. Mind it, in the previous one we discussed that it does not discuss about the public organization, and herein we find that the structure and process of activities of public organizations have been put into a cross-cultural comparison, which makes it comparative. So this focuses on cross-cultural comparison of public organizations. Now, all these are there referring for the coverage, increased coverage of the study of comparative public administration. Also, in simple terms, it could be said, CPA may be defined as cross-cultural and cross-national public administration, and that itself could be a question. बात समझ में आ रही है? I'm trying to. So CPA could be defined as cross-cultural and cross-national comparative study. So in today's condition, CPA means the study of public administration across with governments around the world, using the methods of comparison to better describe and evaluate bureaucracies of world with these conditions. And therein the coverage increases, because in the present perspective, what we identify public administration across and within the government. Across and within the government is a study using methods of comparison to better describe and evaluate bureaucracies. Right, sir? And when we refer rigs, आगे जब बात करेंगे, therein the bureaucracy and Weber's typology happens to be one of the most important thing, with the help of which even Riggs has conducted comparative study. Right, sir? So CPA has commitment to comparison as a method of study. Based upon this, we could conclude, and would be the conclusion of this question and this question. Clear, sir? And all these are there in the perspective of evolution of public administration, comparative public administration. So we can find that CPA compares and contrasts different administrative institutions, norms and behaviors of bureaucracies of different countries in relation to their diverse environmental settings as well, social, political and cultural. And it covers also, its coverage is also wider, as it includes the developed and developing countries. Answer to this question. Its coverage has increased. Conclusion लिख लीजिए, कहीं अलग पन्ने पर लिखिए, फिर उसको, अच्छा आपके पास जगह है, ठीक है, ठीक है. CPA compares and contrasts different administrative institutions. CPA compares and contrasts different administrative institutions, norms and behavior of bureaucracies, norms and behavior of bureaucracies of different countries, in relation to their diverse environmental settings, in relation to their diverse environmental settings, bracket में लिख लीजिए, social, political and cultural, full stop. Its coverage is also wider. Its coverage is also wider, as it includes developed and developing countries. So based upon this, we could say that the post-Second World War approach of CPA delineates an area of concern and a methodological orientation and differs from traditional approach. Sahi hai? So that is evolution. Now in this concern, we could try to evaluate it in a different manner, specifically in the Second World War. And the question is, the failure of TPA, question आप लिख लीजिए, उसी पे लिखिए, हाँ उसी पे लिखिए. The failure of traditional public administration led to emergence of comparative study. Failure of traditional public TPA led to emergence of comparative study of public administration. Describe factors of emergence of CPA. Right? All these will be included in the answer of this. Now, if we try to say categorize it, what were the major reasons of emergence as per Aribam? So, one of the reason is the concern of scholars. That was there because with the failure, the scholars thought that there should be realistic study. Concerns of the scholars. And then we find scholars emphasized upon the evolution. And number of scholars like there is James Coleman. And James Coleman is there to say that you cannot be scientific if you are not comparative. You cannot be scientific if you are not comparative. In this regard, we find Robert Dahl, Roy McCredis, Paul Appleby, Nimrod Raffaelli, D. Waldo. Naam sab likhiye because references of these names will suffice the purpose. Robert Jackson, Robert Dahl, Roy McCredis, Paul Appleby, Nimrod Raffaelli, Raphaeli, D. Waldo, Robert Jackson. These were the scholars who proposed about the comparative public administration to be studied, or comparative study should be inducted. Like we find Robert Dahl and D. Waldo were to say cultural factors could make public administration different from one and another system, and so the cross-cultural study is important. Right? Dahl and Waldo. Now, these are the lines. What you have understood is right, but when you are there to write, by this simple statement, you can easily substantiate what you wanted to, what you have understood, because what we understood, that much of writing is not possible in the examination. Right, sir? So Robert Dahl and Waldo say only cultural factor could make public administration different from one and another. So it is essential to require comparative study. Robert Dahl is there to say, as long the study of public administration is not made comparative, the claims for a science of administration sounds rather hollow. ये तो बहुत famous statement है और प्रश्न में भी मतलब it has been asked as a question. And the advocacy is to make it a science. There is a requirement of comparative study, and in course of making comparative study, there is a requirement that we could refer rigs for the reason of that empirical study, ecological study, and nomothetic study. So that way, the cross-cultural and comparative study happens to be important. Roy Macredis is there to say, the science of administration should be based on cross-cultural and cross-national studies. So again, the same thing comes. The science of administration should be based. So one of the objectives is to make it a science. And to make it a science, there is a requirement to study it comparatively. And this comparative study could be effective, shall be close to reality with the cross-cultural and cross-national studies. So by that way, what we described for the comparative study of public administration, all those are substantiated by means of these scholars, and therein we find that the scholars are there to pay thrust on the cross-cultural and cross-national studies specifically. Robert Jackson is to say it is very difficult to establish the public administration based on scientific elements or scientific administration. Now that is contrast being given, being discussed for the scientific study, and thereby to make it comparative and realistic, universalization. That is not possible practically, but yet it is worth seeing. But even though there is requirement to do it, and by that way giving a contrast, you are proposing that comparative study happens to be effective and required. In course of these, we find the impact of ecology is also one of the important things. After all these, the impact of ecology. And it can be understood through different patterns of culture only. Because Indian administration, Indian bureaucracy, and Pakistani bureaucracy, or Indian bureaucracy and Chinese bureaucracy, Indian bureaucracy and American bureaucracy, all those are the bureaucracies performing in a system, but to what extent they happen to be effective, and if not, or if higher, then the ecology happens to be one of the important things, because administrative systems are similar, hierarchical, division of work, authority, responsibility, etc., etc. But if the system happens to be effective herein, then the change is there in ecology, social, political, cultural, economic. And that way, the public and comparative public administration becomes effective. So, impact of ecology can be understood through different patterns of cultures. And we find the socio-economic and cultural aspects happen to be important one to influence. In course of this, concern of scholars, that is one of the, and itself it could be an independent question. 10 number वाले question में ये हो सकता है, 100 शब्द लिखने, right sir? One another important thing, like impact of behavioral revolution. Yes. Impact of behavioral. So that we studied as revisionist movement. Because of the dissatisfaction from the previous edition of public administration, that was prevailing in America. So it was understood, it was conceived that there should be realistic study. And that is the difference between traditional and behavioral condition. Realistic study in the perspective of making it scientific. So that also led to, because this behavioral condition and realistic study could be made only by means of the comparison, and Wilson is there to propose the same thing. Another important thing that we referred for the reason of bipolar world. So then in USA and USSR were there, and both of the USSR was also willing to extend the communism. On the other hand, USA was willing to restrict the extension of USSR communism, and in course of that, lot of things it did beyond its principles, and advocated for indigenous development and scientific and technological assistance and financial assistance. All those were given. Emergence of newly independent countries there, assistance programs up to the third world countries, and in course of that, the role of Ford Foundation, so to say, IMF and World Bank also, GATT also. So that way things evolved, and based upon these we could draw some questions. जो discuss करा उसमें क्या question हो सकते हैं? The questions are like the pre and post Second World War are of different nature and coverage. Comment, describe, explain, critically evaluate. Another question could be the post Second World War period, the study of CPA has greatly changed its coverage methodology and objectives. So difference between the two batana hai. The post Second World War approach of CPA delineates an era of concern and methodology orientation that differs from traditional approach to public administration. Difference batana. Same thing could be asked in a different manner. That understanding is required. Right, sir? That is evolution. Look, I'm trying to cover whole area so that one glimpse could be there, and how could specific things be made. So you understand and you write are two different things. Right? For writing, you need to have those points on fingertips. Another question. That is resurgence of CP. Another topic here, na? Discuss the resurgence of comparative public administration 1980s and onward, and revival movement. So when we इसके थोड़ा पहले चले जाए, इसको include कर लें discussion में. Basically, it is evolution of CP after Second World War could be categorized into different phases of development. And initially, there was golden era in 50s and 60s. Golden era of development, and it was during 60s. CPA, CAG and all were there, but as it could not be able to come up effective, so decline started. So the another one that is phase of decline. But it was during 70s. And later on, since 80s and onward, the revival movement started. And that is resurgence. 1980 and onwards. So when it is a matter of golden era, at that point of time, that scholars' thrusts were there. A number of scholars, Almond, Coleman, Lucian Pye, Wiedner, Binder, number of scholars were there to advocate about. And initially, in 1961, American Political Science Association established a committee to probe into the matter that how could the comparative study in public administration be conducted. Because if after Second World War and all those, there was a requirement, and it was accepted that there is requirement to read comparatively about the administrative field, including the third world countries. So for the comparative research, there was one committee organized. One scholar, La Polobara, he wrote a book that is Bureaucracy and Political Development. And therein he emphasized about the political dimension of administration. One important thing in course of all these readings, we must remember that the public administration was studied under aegis of political science. It was a subfield of political science. So everywhere, till it got its independence and separate identity from political science, that happened only after NPA, it was being studied under the umbrella of influence of political science. And largely the scholars who are there in public administration, they happen to be scholars from political science with administrative temperament. And is the reason we find herein political aspect of administration were given to a new thrust, new dimension by La Polobara and his book Bureaucracy and Political Development. Number of scholars contributed towards the growth. And in course of that, Michael Crozier, Robert Presthus, Riggs, they contributed with a number of theories and approaches, wherein importance of some Indian scholars are also. O.P. Dwivedi, Kuldeep Mathur, C.P. Bhamri. All these happen to be important scholars who have contributed to the development. And so, lot of things poured into the study of comparative public administration during 60s. And so that is golden era. But it could not be able to come up with some effective output. And was the reason that withdrawal of support, financial support was there, and it declined. So in 60-61, CAG was there, then 70, and then Riggs was there, then 73, Richard Gable was there, and in 73 it got abolished. So the thrust that was to be given to the study, that could not be maintained, and within that span of time, and in between some other developments were also there in America, and that is dedicated to new public administration. So reaction of the young scholars were there against the functionality of the CAG and all. And by the time, as it could not be able to come up something effective, so the withdrawal was. And so CPA almost died with the death of CAG. In course of this, later on, Farrell Heady and Goodshell, Charles Goodshell, were there to take it up for revival. But in 70s it died, and based upon this phase of decline, there could be some question like the behavioral science, which was the very strength of CPA, became the nemesis of CPA itself. Based upon this realistic study, it evolved, but it could not be able to evolve anything, so it became nemesis. That is the answer. There could be similarly another question: the failure to reach a single paradigmatic stage is the major reason of decline of CP. लिख लीजिए, क्वेश्चन तो लिखिए. The failure to reach a single paradigmatic stage. दूसरा क्वेश्चन है ये. The failure to reach a single paradigmatic stage is the major reason for the decline of CPA in 70s. कैसे है ये बताइए. And multiple, there was lack of unanimity for the reason of the studies. Riggs अलग तरीके से कर रहे थे, Widner अलग तरीके से कर रहे थे, Dahl अलग तरीके से कर रहे थे. There was lack of unanimity, and all those are the reasons of the decline. So basically, this is asking the reasons of decline. Therein the emphasis is upon that it could not be able to reach single paradigmatic stage. तो ये एक दूसरा क्वेश्चन ये होता कि it was always in pre-paradigmatic stage, because when the CPA started, it had nothing to do except the objective, right? So that way, this was there. But the important thing is revival movement, and then we find that by early 80s, signs of revival could be found, and in course of that, Farrell Hedy, Charles Goodsell, O.P. Dwivedi, Kuldeep Mathur, Farazman, all these scholars were there who contributed a lot. Although a CPA of 60s and a new CPA of 80s emphasized on cross-cultural, cross-national and cross-temporal perspective. अब देखिए यहाँ पर क्या है कि initially we were there discussing two, wherein the emphasis was there: cultural, cross-cultural, cross-national. Herein in revival movement, cross-temporal has also been included. So cross-cultural, cross-national and cross-temporal perspectives were emphasized in the study of comparative public administration, and they are significantly different from the vibrant and new CPA, which has wider approach, wider scope than 60s. One another important thing that could be found in new CPA, that is, it was not having major concern for theory building, whereas in the traditional CPA, even in post-Second World War CPA, it had a large concern for universalization. So all the arrangements those were made for the reason to universalize, generalize. And CAG was formed also for this reason only, that the information can be gathered, experience could be gathered regarding the administration of third world countries, so that with the information of developed countries, the generalization could be. That could not happen, became the reasons of failure. And herein we find that the CPA did CPA of post 80s did not take that as major objective, primary objective, and by that way it is said that the efforts of contemporary CPA revitalized, reasserted, and henceforth revived CP. That is, revitalized, reasserted, and revived. तो रीजंस क्या देंगे इसके? क्रॉस कल्चरल, क्रॉस national and cross temporal studies, and not emphasizing on theory building. So we could say that this is also one of the reasons that the contingency theory came up. Contingency theory of organizational functioning. Right, sir? So new CPA focused its study on sub-national institutions, that is cross-temporal and local level of studies. Those are local organizations. Those happen to be small organizations, like subaltern institutions, like. So it emphasized on integrating CPA and international administration, because by the time there were international organizations also effectively performing, having objective of good of people of the world. World has all the three blocks: Democratic West, then USSR, and third world countries. And objective is to bring good, do good for all. Universal Declaration of Human Rights, 1948. The perspective is that, right? So we find that the new CPA, that is the reason that it got revitalized, it got revived for the reason of relevance. Kya hai? Another one, it emphasized on integration of CPA with international administration. Integration of CPA with international administration. And we find in this regard number of articles and papers have been published through that SICA section on international and comparative administration, a publication house. Now in course of this we find with the advent of globalization and liberalization, lot of scope of comparison emerged. Relevance of CPA became vital. So with the advent of liberalization and globalization, the study of comparative public administration has become more sophisticated. अब ये क्वेश्चन हो सकता है independently. Within this there could be a small question. Question to note कर लो. With the advent of liberalization and globalization, the study of CPA has become much more sophisticated. कैसे? We find that number of issues like human rights, human trafficking, terrorism, narco-terrorism, cyber crime, ethnic crisis, economic failure, name environmental issues. Environment is one. World may be different with different interests, but the earth is one and environment is one. And it cannot be segregated as per the developed and West and rest and communist countries. ऐसा नहीं हो सकता. And that is another important, very vital reason of integration of CPA and international administration. And without that, the effectiveness and the survival will not be there, as yesterday I referred you for the Lester Brown's eco-friendly development. This eco-friendly development does not bar conditions within the boundary of state. And is the reason we say case study of public administration or CPA has now become boundaryless. So that way we find that a lot of global issues are there, which has made the importance of public CPA significant, rather at the vital importance. And that way the revival is there. That is resurgence of comparative public administration. So the world has become small for the reason of globalization and for the use of ICT. तो अब extension हो गया, globalization and development of information technology has got impact, because for the reason of globalization and the technological development, information technological development, the world has become a global village. And is one of the reasons that we say that now it is for the reason of requirement and the structure of work of administration, administrative structure and conditions also makes the world boundaryless. So countries have become now boundaryless. Individuals are now no longer citizen of one country only. Now they have evolved as world citizens, because concern of America is now not only concern of America. Concern of Afghanistan is not now only concern of Afghanistan. Ukraine and Russia are involved in war. It is not concern of the two countries. It is concern of the whole world. For the reason of the ammunitions exploded over there, all of them have got impact upon the world and its environment. So people have become single humankind irrespective of their race. The idea of communal conflict and discrimination is now not matter of Africa, African countries or Africa continent. It has become a matter of the world, because a lot of Africans are there in America and a lot of Americans are there in Africa. So we find that if there is economic crisis in America or say Europe, it has got impact upon the Asian countries also. Japanese crisis has got impact upon the Western world also. So now the things are, so that by that way we find that opportunity of comparative study has increased massively, and there is no boundary of it, and a lot of impact is there. So for the reason of that development of science and technology, involvement of e-governance, now we could be able to pay in America from Indian bank, having ATM card with international access. The payment is being done by Yes Bank India in America, and it is being debited immediately. So all these and it has got a lot of implications also, because in such conditions, a lot of cyber crimes are there, cyber frauds are there. So massive increase is there, and that is basically resurgence. So 1980s and onward, things are there, right, sir? So question, as we referred, the effort of contemporary CPA, that is new CPA, has revitalized and reasserted the importance of comparative public administration. चलिए, ब्रेक तो नहीं चाहिए. Now in such conditions, the contemporary status, based upon all this, how does it evolve? So the contemporary status of CPA, that is of more concern today. Now this is also one of the things to keep in mind, Basically, when comparative public administration had been started, it was concern of America largely. One of the reasons was this also, that it got started in 30s, late 30s. And at that point of time, rest of the world was under colonial state. So it was America and some of the European countries only. Even after Second World War, the concern for the development of comparative public administration was the interest of America. The third world countries were were willing to find development, but advanced concern for future, concern for world hegemony, all these were there with America, and American public administration evolved in the form of comparative public administration. So the next important thing, we discuss the contemporary status of comparative public administration. Different conditions are there. Basically, इसको थोड़ा और आगे बढ़ाएंगे नीचे या ऊपर बढ़ेगा तो it will come down at the place of, जिसको इसको मिटा के इसके नीचे लिख सकते हैं, तो याद हो ही गया आपको. अच्छा, this simple chart gives you the glimpse of whole development. So you need to remember what we find in CAG in 1973 basically died. Now, when it was 73, this phase had lot of simultaneous developments, and since 1967 it started evolving. 67, then 1968, and then on the interval of 20 years, so 1988, then 2008. As a matter of fact, after this, the revival of CPA continued and is still on. It has not been, let's go. It is still on, and the system is on. System is taking initiatives, and therein we find 2028 and is also there to come. हम लोग 23 में आ गए, तो कुछ साल की ही बात है. And what is this then 2028? These conditions. So and all these are basically, so these 67 has got two important incidents, that is Honey book, Honey report, and then Philadelphia conference. And thereafter in 68, to discuss all these, it was a Minute book. And it was agreed after 20 years, the reassessment would be there of the proposals taken for the futuristic functionalities. So we find that the revival movement is on, simultaneously this is also on, the other part of development, and all these have got intra-relation, impact is there. So for the reason of the contemporary status of comparative public administration, basically the development of the other leg, other stream in public administration in the perspective of new public administration and onward also is there, and that forms the contemporary condition, because that is a dynamic part. It is not static. As per the changes occurring at the other level of the world, it has got impact, because Riggs is there to propose ecological approach. He has discussed in details about the ecology of administration. John Goss is also there to do the same. Right, sir? So keeping these perspectives in view, if we wish to assess the contemporary status of comparative public administration, then we will have to take the impact of Minobrook also, because from there it started, and basically that was the time almost similar, almost contemporary, when the revival movement had been thought and got initiated. So 70s, it started in 80s. It was late 70s when the things were there, and DPA developed, and in course of that, 68 an impact of the new public administration on the world scenario, specifically in the developed countries, because before 80s, all the developments occurred in public administration, all those were dedicated with America. Largely, very few of the incidents are there, or information, some initiatives and output are there which happen outside America. Right, sir? So keeping these perspectives, ab dekho, likhna tumko ye hai, but if you do not have this, say, structural understanding, contemporary development, that network, so it will become difficult to realistically visualize what could be the answer. You might be knowing about all these development, but you would not be able to reciprocate, visualize what answer will be required in this question. So these are the understanding, and based upon this, we try to find out the contemporary development, contemporary status of CPA. So we will need to discuss about the Minobrook and its impact upon the CPA, because it is on process. It is not the process ki यहाँ पे खत्म हो गया, 88 में आया, 2008 में, अभी 28 में भी आना है इसको, and the world is moving towards that, and a lot of things are being visualized in the perspective. So to identify the contemporary status of CPA, let us try to find out the impact of Minobrook conferences. So as per reference, we find the first conference was there in 1968. And it was there against CPA. Basically, it was there against CPA, namely CAG and its functions. Because TPA was there working, it could not be able to take up the responsibility, and then CPA got initiated in 30s, and for different accidents when in post-Second World War, in 60-61, when CAG was established, so it was expected that it will come up with some effective output to tackle the things, but practically it could not. So in 60-61 and then 67, pretty 7 years were in wait. And in between, a lot of things happened in America also as accidents. There was black and white conflict, oil crisis was there, loss in Vietnam War was there. All these were the perspective, and then the reaction of the young scholars were there against it. So against it means it was basically against TPA, but at that point of time it was CPA. So when it was against the CPA, so the representation of the comparative group would not be there. So in first Minno, there was absence of lack of representation from any say scholar, and there was only one scholar, Keith Henderson, to represent CPA. That means ki in course of the development and reviving conditions of CPA, the and development of public administration in America, the representation of CPA was missing. And after the end of conference 1, Henderson was there to say the CPA will be subordinated to study of politics. That much harsh reaction was there against traditional public administration and led by comparative public administration in late 60s. Now, after 20 years, when second Minnowbrook was there, in the second Minnowbrook, there was no contribution, no presentation or any article. So, no contribution, representation, or so to say article, nothing was there. One another important thing that we find in these two conferences, all the scholars whosoever were there, all of them were there from America only. So no foreigner, no scholar other than America was there. So the comparative study had to be static only. The comparative study had to be intellectual thrust only. Right? So, no foreign representation in either of the two conferences was there. In course of that, when there was third Minnowbrook. In the third Minnowbrook, it was there in 2008. You can remember about that was the time when economic depression was there. And we find that by this time, the study of comparative public administration and the study of public administration in America had become comparative because it had a representation from other countries than America also. So, many scholars from outside USA attended the meeting. They were there from Canada, Japan, Germany, New Zealand, even China. Importance is being given or emphasis is given on China for the reason it had totally different culture from the rest of the larger world. So Minnowbrook 3 considered to be conference which broke the American isolationism. So Minnowbrook 3 broke the American isolationism. Is considered. So itself it could be a question. And therein we find that it was now no longer limited to America. Number of articles and papers were presented and carried international perspectives. And the motto of Minnowbrook 3 was the future administration. Public management and public service around the world. Now, it was not concerned with the developed countries only or American perspective only. So that made it realistically comparative, and gradually in the contemporary condition we find it is evolving a lot. And in this concern we find that the number of publications were there, articles, books, even theories and concepts. We find that before 80s the condition was the theories used to evolve in America and then the theories used to penetrate the rest of the world. But in post 80s we find that lot of things are there, those are evolving outside America and gradually penetrating America. So let us have some of the references in post 90s specifically for the different events in the perspective of study of public administration, different contributions of different scholars likewise. So from 90s and with the advent of globalization specifically, number of such groups which were there involved in the study of public administration were formed. And those number of groups were there, like the European group of public administration that was formed. Asian Forum was formed. Later on, that was named as Asian Group of Public Administration. Transatlantic comprising of European and American scholars was formed. Sino-US International Conferences on Public Administration had been convened. International Conference on Public Administration Scholars on China, that was convened. What we find in this regard, now the world scholars have started meeting frequently, which was previously not there. It was restricted to America and American scholars only. So besides, there was also increase in the number of exchange programs around the world. So you could remember there used to happen India Mahotsav in China, in America, America Mahotsav in India, China Mahotsav in India. All these programs were there to share their experiences, and by that way the discipline of public administration evolved, because the two countries, many countries, came in contact with each other, right? So many events occurred, many activities were there. Many activities like in non-American contributions were there in the perspective of development of public administration. Like there is Rhodes' contribution to governance, and that contribution was there in UK, and later on that penetrated to America, rest of the world and America. Christopher Hood's new public management idea, that was there outside America. Boston's administrative reforms that happened in New Zealand. That way we find number of contributions were there. And some publication of Farrell Eddy is very important. Eddy's publication, Public Administration Comparative Perspective. Donald Roberts' contribution, Public Administration in Developing Democracies. Not only that, there are e-journals also addressing different needs of different countries and being initiated by different countries. Apart from this, United Nations is also there, which is there integrating different countries and their administrative system. Such international countries, organizations like ADB, Asian Development Bank. So Asian Development Bank is having generation of funds from all countries of the world, but the fund is being used for the development of Asian countries, and therein technical assistance are also extended. World Bank is there giving financial assistance for the reason of infrastructure development. Now, many of the countries in the world are there who need infrastructure development, but they do not have the knowledge that they could be able to evolve. And therein technical staff college is there in America, which is having number of technical experts who are there to visit such countries, identify the project, suggest value addition, and then is there to fund. And all these come under the aegis of contemporary development of public administration. When it is a matter of issues, yes, we have discussed this one. Previously, it was terrorism or problem of America, problem of India, but now it is having global implication. And that way, we find that comparative public administration has become more comparative than truly comparative. So that's the question. CPA has become more comparative than truly. So the coverage has increased on. Basically, this is asking about the contemporary status of public administration. Right, sir? Thereafter, the another we'll cover it. We have started a little late today also, and it was for some technical problem. More than that, for the rainy day. एक बजे तक का है कि 12 बजे तक का है? आपको 1 बजे आया है? अच्छा, ठीक है, मुझे तो 12 बजे आया. आपको क्या आया? आपको जो आया वही सही है. मुझे 9 से 12 ही आया है. अच्छा, कोई नहीं. You have to introduce, keep the contemporary, take the example of contemporary status of CPU. You have to write. Therein, you need, if it is discussed or explained or anything, even if it is comment, you have to introduce what you wanted to write. And that the contemporary status of comparative public administration has evolved, that we could evaluate on the basis of these perspectives. 1, 2, 3. And then body of the answer would be there. What you are going to do in the next paragraph, that should reflect. So likewise, today when we started this discussion on comparative public administration, what we did is introduction. We did not do anything in detail, but we identified the areas, those will be covered. That is introduction. Right? And you should not consume more than 1-2 lines in introduction, because your basic answer is analysis, that is body, and most important is conclusion. Most important is conclusion, wherever and whatever is the question. And even if the question does not demand for the conclusion, you should write conclusion. Because think over it, you discuss a lot of things, and if you do not conclude, then it is open. That should not occur. Likewise, whatever I am discussing, I am giving you the conclusion today. That I do not do in foundation class. I leave it deliberately open. for you to think. I discuss everything and then I leave it open deliberately, so that you could be able to think how to conclude and what would be the output of whole discussion. But demand of this class is conclusion also. That we are trying to do. Thereafter, Riggs typology. Discuss Riggs view. और नहीं, उसके पहले discuss Riggs and his models. Riggsian model. Namely, when we go to find out, he has given two approaches and two models: ecological approach, structural functional approach. And then initially Agraria Industria, then Agraria Transitia Industria, and fused prismatic and diffracted society models. And later on in 75, he discussed about the prismatic society revisited, wherein he identified the finer typology in prismatic and diffracted society, as those finer conditions do not happen in fused society, so he did not refer that. That is the introduction. What we will discuss in next 20 minutes, that is this. So Riggs models are, so first of all, it is ecological approach. As per our previous discussions, we have been able to understand that ecology is the essential requirement for the comparative study. Riggs was one of the scholars who took this responsibility to initiate the study even before he was made chairman of comparative administration group. So 60 mein bane, and he did all these in 57, 58, 59. Right? So therein we find ecological approach has been emphasized by Riggs, and he refers to the mutual relations collectively between an organism and its environment. The ecological approach assumes that the administrative behavior is peculiarly modeled by value of administrative culture, in which it functions. The administrative culture in turn bring an outgrowth of interaction of values and traits of the administrative system and social system prevailing in the system. That is, so to say, ecological approach. And in this regard, we find that John Goss, Robert Dahl, Rose Martin, Robert Merton, Fred Riggs, these scholars are there who have contributed to the ecological approach. Herein we will refer Riggsian ecological approach. And in course of that, he has proposed about the 5 aspects of ecology. Those 5 aspects are economic, social, symbolic, communicative, and political. So these different dimensions of American life has been picked up to substantiate his views, and he proves that all these have got impact upon the study of administration and behavior and impact of the administrative activities. That means when it is economic dimension, the fiscal policy of the country has got impact upon the administration accordingly. Yes, agreed. When it is a matter of family, society, religious condition of the particular place, different social strata prevailing in the society, all these have got impact upon administration. Because if the black and white say conflicts are there in America itself, which is considered, which is a developed country, therein also, even after developed status, the administration will have to adopt coercive means to control things. Right? So the administrative mechanism has got impact and influence of the society, and that is social condition. When it is symbolic, then it refers to the beliefs of society. It refers the consensus prevailing in the society. It refers to the myth prevailing in the society. Although it's a myth, but if consensus is there on that myth, then the administration cannot avoid that. We'll have to act in accordance to that. Whatever the hostility prevailing in Indian society between Hindus and Muslims, that is basically a myth, misunderstanding. But administration cannot sift it, avoid it, that as it is based on misunderstanding, so nothing will happen. No. And in keeping that in perspective, the lawmaking, administrative arrangement, implementation, everything, all of them are happening. And is the reason that the system has evolved itself as a secular state. So basically this secular state condition is the output of the impact of society, impact of this symbolic status prevailing in one society, and that is ecology, and is there to influence the administration. When it is communicative, then it depends upon the literacy, awareness, system of communication, authenticity of communication. Because in course of being communicated, or in course of finding information, lot of informal information, informal communications happen essentially. And that informal communication we call as rumor. Because these informal communications are not authenticated communication. And all these have got impact. And then the political, that change in the political regime, party composition, personality of the leader. Modi ji is the person who has been able to integrate the whole country largely, and that's a big achievement. And this also has got impact upon administration. We can take example of the Yogi government. What Riggs says is quite right that way. And that is his ecological approach. In course of studying public administration and to generalize, because again, we are reading Riggs in the perspective of CPA, which has got objective of generalization. So to reach to a generalization, there is requirement to read administration of each country in the perspective of ecology, which has got impact upon administration. Based upon that, only the generalization is possible. So, according to Riggs, the 5 environmental factors mentioned have enormous, deep impact directly on the functioning of public administration. And especially in a transitional society of third world. And in that perspective, we can memorize, we can find the we can get reference of Solomon. We can get reference of heterogeneity and formalism prevailing in the prismatic society. That has got impact of ecology only. Right, sir? And therein we find that he is there to propose cross-cultural approach of study. Right, sir? So the ecological approach determines how the administrative system operates in reality. And it is useful to understand administrative realities. In organization theory, the ecological approach considers the environment to critical importance. That is ecological approach. He is there to propose another one, that is structural functional approach. Riggs is there to propose that for one function there is a structure, and then only the specialization could evolve. That is, in nutshell, structural functional. The structure is considered as a pertinent pattern of action or behavior, and function is considered as any function is refers to any consequence of a structure. And based upon that, he is there to propose his typologies. This approach is there to help. So all social structures perform some functions, and in structural functional terms, a function involves a pattern of interdependence between two or more structures, a relationship between different variables. So it is referred to any consequence of a structure insofar as they affect other structures or the total system in which they are the part. So every structure has got its function, and structure function has got impact upon the administration depending upon the cohesion or repulsion. That is the structural functional approach, and in course of that, society performs these 5 functions and depends upon the level of development of country. Because in a developing country, in underdeveloped country, one structure is there to perform a lot of functions. Whereas in developed countries like diffracted society, the conditions are there that every function has got specialized structure. And that is the reason he calls it a diffracted society, wherein higher level of differentiation is found. That differentiation basically refers to specialization. So based upon this approach of structural functional, Riggs is there to propose different models. And then, according to Riggs, the world is divided. He was the almost first scholar to propose about the distinction of different countries based upon economic development. And based upon his agraria, transitia, industria concept only, the concept of developed, developing and underdeveloped evolved later on in the economic field to assess the development of countries. So he is there to propose about two typologies. One is agraria, transitia and industria. So as a matter of fact, when we identified the agraria and industria, he was criticized. In 1956, when he identified agraria industria, he was criticized. It is not conditioned that any country, any system could be exactly industria and exactly transition. It is not possible. So to cope up with the criticism he proposed about industria, the system starts to reach industria, and in between the status till it reaches from here to here is transition. But Riggs himself was not very much satisfied. And then in 59, later on, he proposed about fused prismatic and diffracted society. So what he found, a polarized model is inadequate to depict the characteristics that contributes the developing countries' administrative system. So for this limitation, Riggs abandoned the previous model that differentiated between agraria and industria and created a more diverse yet simplified model, that of fused prismatic and diffracted models. His objective to identify fused and diffracted was to study prismatic. You remember this one? He had a larger concern for the developing countries. He was among scholars who studied about the developing country. And the conditions were not standard and known to the American scholars. Whereas the number of fused societies were very less in number in underdeveloped states. And the diffracted societies were already under the coverage of public administration scholars. They were knowing about it. So larger concern was there for the prismatic society. So he discussed more about the prismatic society. Although he also referred about the fused society. Fused hypothetical model is a society in which all component structures are highly diffused. So basically that is the status of underdeveloped country, wherein the structure is not well developed, structure of administration is not well developed. There is paucity of fund, paucity of experience, paucity of resources, skilled person, sab cheez kam hai. So therein there is requirement that one system is there that will have to take all the responsibilities. So the system happens to be highly diffused. And for this, he took up the example of China. The another extreme of the development, he identified diffracted. And in the diffracted hypothetical model of the society, in which all component structures are highly specific, herein the conditions are diffused, and herein highly structured. And in between he identified prismatic society. And he described about prismatic society in details. And that famous diagram is known to all. Prism wala? The white light, so it is fused. It is a diffracted light, so it is diffracted society. And in between, the condition of diffused and diffracted, both are there. And that he named as prismatic society. Ye sabko sab janta hai. And then he tried to identify the conditions of prismatic society. And for that prismatic society, he took the example of Philippines and Thailand. And he proposed that prismatic society happens to be at the intermediate level. Yes. Agriculture and modernization and industrialization, all the things are found over there. So it's a mixture of both agrarian and industrial conditions. And then bazaar canteen model evolves, wherein as per the people, the price is determined. So price indeterminacy prevails and it changes according to the persons in front of the person. And that says, show me the person, I'll show you the rule. Show me the person, I'll show you the price. That is bazaar canteen model. And administrative system is referred as sala model, sala officers, which happens to be a Spanish word which means government office, a room or place or that. Now, in course of this, when the cell officer is there, it is prismatic society which finds inefficiencies for the reason of the prevalence of Sala model of bureaucracy or Sala officers. Why? Because Sala is prismatic because it superimposes the traditional over the modern, and because it asserts political power. That we have the reference in unbalanced polity of Riggs. So it is said that the more power is acquired by cell officer, less inefficient or higher inefficiency prevails. The more inefficiency prevails. And then for the prismatic society, those three important characteristics are there: heterogeneity, formalism, and overlap. For the reason of overlapping, number of things evolve. Nepotism, this bazaar canteen model is there for the reason of overlapping. The polycommunalism, polynormativism, collects are there for the reason of these overlapping conditions. Now, herein, he is there to describe about the prismatic society conditions. Later on, so herein, what he is referring is differentiation. Okay, the level of development is differentiation. Based upon this differentiation in the defective society, he is there to propose that the condition of development is there. And what he proposes, in the prismatic society, the level of differentiation is there to certain areas, but integration is missing. For the reason of that missing integration, it is in prismatic society status. And so he proposes, when we find that prismatic society revisited, so therein he makes it two-dimensional. So herein the condition is one-dimensional. That is differentiation. And with the differentiation, he includes integration also. So it is not by means of only differentiation, the development does not happen. All the differentiated part should be integrated. With the integration, only the resultant would be there. And that is his concept of prismatic society revisited. So diffraction, as Riggs initially meant, a one-dimension variable that equated development. So that we could consider the concept of Riggs for the reason of development, that from one dimension improved to two dimensions, and that is prismatic society revisited. Because Riggs considered initially that the development is differentiation, but later on he improved it with integration of with the inclusion of integration, right? So it was dependent on differentiation only, that he equated for the reason of development in the diffracted society. That is extent of subdivision or segmentation of society structures and its functions. And later on, he made it two-dimensional. So diffraction, he made diffraction two-dimensional variables, and that is differentiation and integration. Differentiation with was a possibility to increase social malintegration. By integration, he means close coordination among social structures, and integrating all those, the development is there. So advantage of two-dimensional approach is that any society on any level of differentiation could be prismatic. And for that, he proposed that वो diagram तो पता होगा आप लोग को, मिटा देते हैं इसको. So it is the representation of diffracted society for the reason of integration, and it is representation of prismatic societies. And this EO ortho neo is in increasing trend. EO is low or traditional society, ortho is mixed or combined society, and neo is diffracted society. Right, sir? So that this discussion covers 4 and 5. Riggs and his views on development. Right, and therein one of the representation is even in diffracted society the prismatic condition could happen, because this represents less integrated condition in comparison to this, and with the integration the development would increase. Right, and as herein inadequately integrated, so less integration is there. So at the neo level the prismatic society will be quite less developed, and so the condition of EO, less developed condition, that could be there in the diffracted society and prismatic society as well. That is one of the technical understanding. And then based upon this discussion we could have some question like, because अच्छा note कर लीजिए पहले इसको. Question is कि because of coexistence of contrasting system, comma, there are push and pulls. There are push and pulls in different directions. Making it difficult to draw generalization. Making it difficult to draw generalization. All those are with the reference of heterogeneity, formalism, and overlapping. Different pulls and pushes are there. And for that reason, in such condition of, say, prismatic society, how will it be possible to integrate it with diffracted society and have a generalization? One another question could be, the fused and diffracted societies have relatively high degree of realism in comparison to prismatic society, which has high degree of formalism. And then for the view of Riggs on development, the prismatic society is characterized by high degree of differentiation and poor integration. For that reason only, the prismatic society is prismatic in nature. The differentiation is there. Take the example of India. Lot of areas are there properly developed, but there is absence of integration, and so the underdevelopment is prevailing. In course of policy making and policy implementation, you could easily visualize this one. And there is lack of integration from the people to the government machinery. And so we find that not a lot of policies are there, but they do. Right? So this is comparative public administration. We are almost done in time. Right, sir? So in the next class, we'll take up development public administration. ठीक है? Anything more that you wanted to ask today? Critical appraisal नहीं लिया हम लोगों ने. Critical appraisal of rigs. अच्छा, चलिए उसको भी ले लेते हैं. हाँ, वैसे क्रिटिसिज्म तो वही है, वही होने चाहिए. You could say appraisal or you could say criticism. We'll take a simple way, in a very simplified manner. The first of all, we find Riggs tried to compare prescribed and practiced. So, conditions in diffracted society, he is there to refer as prescribed. And the conditions in prismatic society, he is there discussing practicing. So what is how is it possible to compare? Because comparison would be there at the similar level. So one of the criticism is this, that Riggs tried to compare prescribed, tried to compare prescribed in reflected society and practiced in prismatic society. He studied about the impact of environment on administration. And what about vice versa? It also happens. He did not, and this vice versa impact is very important. Take the example of India. When it was there in UPA government mechanism, the condition of the country. And when it is there in NDA government mechanism, the condition of the country happen to be quite different. So administration also has got impact upon the political, social, cultural environment and all. That has not been referred. And it has got large impact if the awareness among the people generates and people become participative, people become proactive. So it is said that with the matured society, the level of governance will increase because people will become aware, people will become demanding, and then the government will have to respond. A big example, I had not taken this limitation and appraisal, but as you told, I took. There is impact of administration on environment also. That has not been considered, which is not right. He did not discuss the impact of administration on environment. मतलब कि he discussed only impact of environment or administration. That is not right. Whatever the theoretical construct he gave, the typologies, it is not empirically tested. It is observation. The observation might be mature, but is not empirically tested. So it is difficult to implement it in all respect, which is not possible. And limitations are there. Limitations are found. So created theoretical construct without empirical base. Formalism has been taken as negative phenomena of prismatic society. Formalism has been taken as negative phenomena, but it is not only negative. The way Riggs has proposed is the negative dimension, but I could propose in numerous manner wherein it has got positive dimension, because formalism brings uniformity, and for a country which is prismatic and requires development, there is formalism required so that the law could be enforced in a uniform manner. Otherwise, that difference of strata would prevail. So Riggs is there to reflect the negative connotation of formalism only, wherein it has got advantages also. Reflected negative connotation of formalism only, whereas it has massive advantages also. Only by means of formalism, the authority, responsibility, accountability can be fixed. And without that, the effectiveness in functionality is not there. Overlapping exists in all societies. Degree may be higher or lesser. So in American society also overlapping is there. So overlapping exists in American administration also. And it has got advantages also. Sometimes it is beneficial also. The vocabulary is coined by Riggs. Instead of clarifying things, it puts us in confusion mode. And merely using the scientific words, the theoretical construct does not happen to be science. And that's a big problem. And for the reason of heterogeneity, formalism, polycommunalism, nepotism, and its implication, it becomes difficult to exactly take up and understand. One scholar is there to say ki, criticizing Riggs ki, Riggs requires minimum 3 readings to understand. So his way of writing and conveying his views happened to be so difficult. So vocabulary coined by Riggs happened to creates confusion. A lot of confusions are there. Ramesh Sarola is there to propose that it has got Western biasness. It has got Western biasness. So these are the criticisms. Abhi bahut sare ho sakte hain. These are the major criticisms paid to Riggs. Okay, sir. So we have been able to complete till 6. 6 और हैं, कल कर लेंगे. Right, sir? Thank you.